So, my name is Arnis Paršovs, and I work in this university in Institute of Computer Science. And maybe you know that Estonian ID card is my favorite research topic. And today I will talk about potential security improvements for the Estonian ID card. So currently the Estonian state is preparing to announce a procurement for the Estonian ID card manufacturing for the next 5 years. And perhaps this is a good moment where to introduce maybe some more significant changes in the ID card manufacturing, personalization, and post-issuance processes. All right, so in the next of the few slides, I will go over 7 more or less specific proposals on how to improve security of the Estonian ID card or introduce some security features. So let's start with the first proposal. The first proposal is removal of private key import-export functionality. Now, if you're living in Estonia, perhaps you have heard about this scandal a few years ago where the Estonian state discovered that the ID card manufacturer had generated keys outside the card and copied them inside the smart card, ID card smart card. And in some cases, the same private key copy was copied into the ID cards of different cardholders. So that's a very bad thing. I mean, because if anyone has copy of our private keys, then they can impersonate us online to full extent, right? Even cast a vote in elections. So first, this ID card manufacturer denied the wrongdoing, but later kind of acknowledged, and this is a screenshot from a Peltmägi program, and here we can see that Andreas Lehmann, this representative of Gemalto, claims that the solution was made by their local partner here, and according to him, he also didn't know that this was achieved with a private key generation outside the chip. Anyhow, so the question you may ask is, why did it happen, right? And one answer, of course, is because lack of control and supervision, right? But from the other hand, the reason why it happened is also because it was possible. The ID card chip platform that was purchased by the Estonian state enabled this private key import functionality. And here you can see the elliptic curve private key interface for Java card platform. Basically, Java card platform is the operating system that is used in the Estonian ID card. And here you can see that it has 2 methods. GetS returns the value of the secret key, and setS, which sets the value of secret key. So this is basically import and export functionality provided by the operating system. And now the question is here, does the Estonian ID card should have these operating system methods available? If it is supposed to use only keys that are generated inside the card and never leave the card and never get imported in the card? And the answer is no. So the first proposal is for the Estonian state to procure ID card platform that doesn't have this import and export functionality, so that the only way that the private keys could be used with the card is only if these keys were generated inside the chip and they have never left the chip. So that's the first proposal. Now the second proposal is the removal of the police key. And for those of you who don't know, a police key is official backdoor in the ID card, which is used to change or unblock PIN codes, block PIN codes. So what you see here, this is a 32 byte symmetric key, which is loaded in the card personalization process. And anyone who has this key, these 32 bytes, they can change and unblock PIN codes. And this feature is used in police and border guard board customer service points to print new PIN envelopes for cardholders who have blocked or forgotten their PIN codes. Kind of legitimate use. And now the problem is that, as I told, anyone who has these 32 bytes, they can unblock, recover, and change PIN codes on your ID card without any trace being left on the ID card, right? And this is not good. Of course, the ID card manufacturer has promised that this key will never be abused, only official, legitimate use, but promises are maybe not very efficient security measures, and especially if in history these promises have been broken. So this proposal here is very simple, to remove this police key. And then you may ask, then how do we issue new PIN envelopes to the cardholders? And the answer here is that instead of unblocking the PIN codes for the current certificates, the cardholder can go to the police and border guard service point, and instead he will get a new eID instance installed in his card with new keys, new certificates, and new PIN codes, right? So because this process involves issuance of new certificates, it basically leaves cryptographic trace and cannot be done only by someone who has these 32 bytes of this key string. All right, so the third proposal is removal of the certificate suspension mechanism. And certificate suspension mechanism is, in theory, a very nice security feature or measure. And so here we can, for instance, if you have lost or you think you have lost your ID card, it has been stolen, you can call to this phone number here and ask over the phone your certificates to be, validity of certificates to be suspended. And later, in case you find your ID card, then you can go write an application, and the suspension will be terminated, and you can keep using these certificates. They will be valid again. And also, the law says that the certificates and e-seals given while the certificates are suspended should not be valid. It kind of makes sense, but there is just one problem, is that technology doesn't prevent abuse of the ID card while the certificates are suspended. So in theory, I should be able to call the helpline to suspend my certificates, then give my ID card with the PIN codes to you, and you shouldn't be able to forge any digital signatures. But in practice, you can. If you have my PIN codes, you can forge a cryptographic signature, and later, when I get back my ID card and PIN codes and terminate the certificate suspension, you can obtain valid certificate check, and you will obtain a valid digital signature in my name. So that's the problem why actually the suspension mechanism doesn't work, and it doesn't work in nowhere where it is enabled. I mean, Estonia is not the only country which supports this mechanism, but while in theory it sounds good, in practice, unfortunately, it doesn't prevent this kind of risk. And another problem is also, of course, the related problem is that electronic eIDAS regulation sets a requirements what has to be done to verify the validity of digital signature. And of course, there is this requirement that it has to verify that the certificate was valid at the time of signing. And because we have this certificate suspension, we actually cannot ascertain that the signature was not given in this period of suspension when it shouldn't be valid. And because of this, actually, today in Estonia, we cannot verify any digital signature given using ID card according to eIDAS legal requirements. So the good thing would be to get rid of the certificate suspension. And as a solution, then, it still should be able, of course, for the cardholders to call in case their ID card is lost or stolen. But instead of suspending the certificates, these certificates then should be fully revoked. And in case the cardholder later finds his ID card, he can go again to the customer service point and get a new eID instance with new keys, new certificates, and new PIN codes. There is really no good reason why the cardholder should be able to terminate suspension of the same certificate. He will get a new certificate, but from the user's perspective, this shouldn't really change anything, because at the end of the day, he can still continue using his ID card or her ID card. All right, this is the third proposal. The fourth proposal is related proposal, and it's called certificate issuance on the first use of eID. I don't know if you know or don't know, but once your ID card is manufactured, the certificates for this ID card is in suspended state until you come to the customer service point and you physically receive your ID card with PIN codes. And after that, the customer service point employee will enter into the database to record that, okay, let's remove suspension now. The card has been given to the cardholder. And of course, because it uses the same certificate suspension, it doesn't help police employee who has PIN codes can forge signatures before the ID card is given to the cardholder. And we have the same eIDAS validation issues because of this certificate suspension mechanism being used here. So as a solution, as a security measure, instead of suspending these certificates, the proposal is to make sure that the ID card is issued to the cardholder without certificates. And once the cardholder inserts the ID card on first use in his computer, let's say Digidoc utility, then downloads and installs the certificates into the ID card. In this case, the cardholder will get the certificates only once the card is in his or her possession. And this is very similar actually to mobile ID. I don't know if you have observed that once you get a SIM card from the mobile operator, you go to the police website, you click that you have received it, and only at that moment the certificates for mobile ID get issued. All right, so the fifth proposal is introduction of transport PIN. And let me give you a bit of background here. So the problem, this is how the current PIN envelope looks. The problem with the current PIN issuance process is, first of all, that the ID card manufacturer learns the PIN codes, right? Because he has to set it into each ID card, he has to print it on this PIN envelope to issue to the cardholder. And because the cardholders are actually not forced to change it, right? They're actually, I don't know how many people in Estonia have changed all the codes, including the PUK code for the ID cards they obtain. Maybe there are some, but I think for most of the cardholders, these PIN codes and PUK codes stay the same. And the other problem is that this PIN envelope, it is also at risk while it is before it's being handed out to the cardholder. And sometimes it has turned out that these PIN envelopes can actually be looked through using a lamp. So this picture is one example, and credit goes to Martin Paljak for making this picture. So theoretically, someone who sees these PIN codes, again, can abuse this ID card before it has been issued to the cardholder. And the problem is that there is no trace left on the ID card to detect that someone has used PIN codes in your ID card before it has been handed out to you, right? And so the solution here is introduction of transport PIN. So this is actually how the envelope would look. You would have received something that is called activation code, which technically is the PUK code, which can be used to set all the PIN and PUK codes. So again, first use of the ID card, the ID card utility will ask for this activation code, and afterwards would set the new PIN and PUK codes and ask you to write them down. And so the security benefit here is, first, that the user is forced to change or set the PIN codes that are known only by the user. And the second is that the confidentiality of this transport PIN, it matters only while it is in transport, before the user has used it, right? And if someone will try to use this transport PIN to use the ID card before it is delivered to the user, of course the user will detect it because he will not be able to use this code himself to set the PIN codes. And this feature is also important for the next proposal, and this next proposal is called remote ID card issuance and maintenance. Probably you know that today in Estonia you cannot get Estonian ID card without physically showing up in a police customer service point or foreign representation. And this may be a problem, especially if you are living very far abroad, or you have maybe moving disability, or in case of COVID, where we want to reduce physical contact. And then the idea is how could we actually issue securely ID card remotely, right? And here maybe the idea is simple. You apply for it, whatever, online by filling a form, and then the ID card with a PIN code envelope is sent to you over regular mail. And then, of course, it has to be activated, right? There still has to be physical identity verification to verify that you indeed received your ID card. And this can be moved online in a way of video meeting. This is example. This is screenshot from a remote e-notary service that I think is piloted and available in Estonia. And something similar could be done also in case of to activate the ID card. And we can go even further. We could even issue new PIN envelopes and replace revoked certificates on the ID card using this similar procedure. But then there should be some option for the police employer or the service to interact with the ID card that is connected to the computer, right? So preferably there should be a browser extension which would relay the communication from the ID card personalization center to the ID card, and in this way it would be possible to remotely, let's say, set new PIN codes or replace revoked certificates. And this is something probably this remote ID card issuance and maintenance is some topic that we'll probably have to return eventually anyway. And the last proposal which I want to mention is called eMRTD loading in all types of ID cards. So this eMRTD stands for electronic machine readable travel document, also called biometric passport or e-passport, which you have heard. So what it is, this electronic machine readable travel document, it is enabled by the travel document containing a smart card chip, and this chip stores cryptographically signed cardholder information, also including the facial image and fingerprints, and it also supports challenge response protocol that allows to cryptographically verify the authenticity of this chip, to verify that this chip hasn't been cloned. Right, and maybe you know that this technology is used or basically targeted towards enabling automated border control, as you see here in the picture, and in airports. And today, two ID card types have this electronic machine readable applet, and this is identity card from August last year, and residence permit card. Now, the digital identity card and e-residence digital identity card and diplomatic identity card, they do not have this chip. They do not support this electronic machine readable travel document specification. And the reason, main reason, is because these two documents, they are not travel documents, right? So digital identity card isn't meant for traveling. However, this technology is not used only for traveling, right? Indeed, we mostly see them in the airports, but some of you maybe have seen it being used, let's say, in Smart ID, remote onboarding, and it basically opens the possibility to remotely prove your identity. No matter over what channel, over browser, over here in Smart ID application. So the use cases of this technology are much more than just automatic border control. All right, so with this I end my presentation, and these proposals, these 7 proposals, I have also written down maybe in more detailed manner in the report, which is also available on the internet in case you are interested. And yeah, if you have some comments or ideas, feel free to contact me here or afterwards. I will be happy to hear them. So with this, I end my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Question time. Oh, wow. Let's start from wherever. Yeah, that.
Thank you. Very interesting presentation. I have a question about point 5, forcing users to set pins when they get the cards and activate them. What is your estimate? How many cards will have the birthday or the birth year of the owner as a pin after this change?
Can we get slides back? Yeah. All right, so the idea, this is the proposal, now that's important, yeah, what you're pointing out. The proposal is not to force them to set the new codes, but the proposal is that the machine or their computer or their ID card utility would set those codes for them and only allow them to write these codes down. For example, this is actually how it was done in 2017 in certificate update process, right? The users were not asked to input, they were just presented with these PIN codes, which they had to then mark down and click a checkbox here, I confirm I have stored these new codes, and click continue. So in this case, well, the machine will generate them randomly, and unless user goes extra step to set manually to their birthday, then this should provide relatively good security guarantees. And of course, I mean, if you look at those PIN codes which we chose in mobile devices, where you have this, Smart ID, and most of the users probably choose something that is visually easy to remember, right? The first rows or columns, but in this case, it shouldn't be the issue, right?
Yeah, we had the question down here before, and then back up.
Hi. Some of those suggestions are independent, but I think that most of them should actually combined. So basically you suggest to get rid of certificate suspension, which means no pre-issued certificates, and also no pre-generated PIN and book codes. And in order to make it all feasible, basically this remote verification and remote activation must be default. So it's a huge change. So my question actually is, do you think that it's possible to do it for the next round of ID card, not for this one that is coming up, because it's, I don't know, 1 year, too much, because I think it's business processes, it's like a software that RIA is maintaining, software on the card, perhaps legislation, I don't know, whatever needs to be changed, that it all must be tested and piloted, etc. Do you think that we can get this for the next round?
Yeah, I don't know, actually. I don't know how smooth are the processes and the research and development in police and RIA and so on. But of course, yeah, you could look at them separately. They provide a benefit even if they're implemented one by one separately. But yeah, it probably would make sense to implement them together. That would be easier also for end users. And for instance, this transport PIN, for instance, this is not something new. This is used in Finnish ID cards and also in Germany. So the Germans and Finns are, so to say, used to this process of setting their PIN codes. Yeah. Although there, I think, yeah, they have to enter PIN code, not the machine sets for them, but they have to enter. So yeah, very hard to say. I mean, the true answer to your question is the willpower. Is there enough willpower? Is there a motivation to introduce these changes, right? And usually we need some scandals for this to happen in Estonia.
Okay, we will have one more question, and then it's Martin's time. Yeah, middle there. Two people sitting together, actually.
No,
both have a question.
I already have the microphone, so I will ask anyway.
Okay. Yes, please do.
So, heretical question. The ID card's usability compared to mobile phone-based identities is kind of bad. And getting the drivers to be updated at all times and making sure that you have browser compatibility, blah, 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 blah. If we now start assuming that everybody who gets an ID card has a working DigiDoc client application, that will make it even less usable. So how do we solve that? Do we actually move just everybody to the mobile phone-based systems because everybody has a smartphone anyway?
There have to be applications that the users use daily that require ID card. I mean, I don't want to get into the security of mobile IDs, right? And I mean, suboptimal security in my opinion. But there simply has to be, let's say, online voting, where we don't go with the mobile IDs that have inherently more risks, where the users at least, I mean how it was in the beginning, that there is at least this one use case where the users have to practice entering their PIN codes and upgrading their ID card software or whatever. Unfortunately, I believe that we can build a secure mobile ID solution, but this day hasn't come yet, therefore the ID card is the most secure thing we have so far. So we can't throw it away just for usability reasons. And in Estonia, people actually have a very good experience using this not so convenient ID card. So, I mean, a great appreciation to them for that.
Okay, thank you. We are out of time for Arnis, but if you hang around here, I don't know, will you go back home?
Let's see.
So you can grab him and ask him questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
And here is a gift for you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.